On Christmas Eve, a desperate 11-year-old girl stumbled through a blizzard toward a strange Hobbit cabin buried in the Montana hills, seeking warmth and shelter, never imagining the $300 million secret waiting beneath its floors would change not just her life, but the entire art world forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind howled like something alive and furious as it tore across the frozen Montana plains. Emma Reynolds now, or was it Emma Martinez? She'd lost track after the 6th foster home, pressed her face against the ice-crusted window of the farmhouse bedroom, watching the sky turn from grey to something darker, something that looked like the end of the world. She was 11 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that hadn't been properly cut in months, and eyes that had learned too early how to stay quiet, how to become invisible. The thermometer nailed to the porch post outside read 19 degrees, and it was dropping fast. She could see her breath inside the room. The space heater her foster mother had given her had stopped working 3 days ago. Emma had mentioned it twice. Both times, Linda Reynolds had waved her off with a distracted, "We'll get to it," before returning to her phone or her wine or whatever else mattered more than a foster kid's comfort. That was Christmas Eve in the Reynolds house. Linda and her husband Robert had left 2 hours ago, dressed in their Sunday best, smelling of cologne and hairspray. They were heading to some party in town, 45 minutes away. Linda had pointed to a box of crackers and some peanut butter on the counter. "There's dinner," she'd said, not even looking at Emma. "We'll be back late. Don't touch anything." The door had slammed. The truck had rumbled down the long gravel driveway, and Emma had been alone. Again. She'd lived with the Reynolds family for 4 months now, the longest she'd stayed anywhere since her mother died 3 years ago. Not that it felt like home. Nothing had felt like home since the small apartment in Billings where her mom used to braid her hair and sing off-key while cooking spaghetti. That world had vanished the night her mother's heart simply stopped beating. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. After that came the system, the social workers with tired smiles, the temporary placements, the families who took her in for the monthly check and nothing more. She'd learned not to unpack completely, learned not to ask for things, learned that being invisible was safer than being seen. Emma pulled on 2 pairs of socks, both with holes, and wrapped herself in the thin blanket from her bed. The house was old, drafty, and the heating system rattled like it was dying. Outside, the wind picked up. She watched the trees bend, their branches scraping the sky like skeletal fingers. The weather report that morning had mentioned possible snow, but nothing serious. Montana winters were harsh, but people here knew how to handle them. Except this didn't look like possible snow. This looked biblical. By 6 in the evening, the first flakes began to fall. Big, heavy, silent. Within minutes, the world outside turned white. Emma stood at the window, mesmerized and afraid. She'd seen snow before, but never like this. Never so fast, so thick. It swallowed the fence posts. It buried the driveway. It erased the horizon until there was nothing but white static, like the universe had lost signal. Then the power went out. The lights blinked once, twice, and died. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The rattle of the heater went silent. The house plunged into a darkness so complete, Emma's heart seized in her chest. She fumbled for her phone, a cheap prepaid thing the social worker had given her for emergencies. The screen glowed weakly. 15% battery, no signal. She tried the landline in the kitchen. Dead. She stood in the cold, silent house, listening to the wind scream outside, and realized with sharp, cold clarity that she was in trouble. Real trouble. The kind adults were supposed to prevent. But there were no adults here. Just her. Emma moved through the house, checking every room. She found a flashlight in the kitchen drawer, tested it. The beam was weak, but functional. She gathered every blanket she could find, piled them in the living room near the fireplace. But there was no firewood. The Reynolds didn't use the fireplace. "Too much work," Robert had said once. She opened cabinets, searching for candles, matches, anything. She found a box of birthday candles, half melted and forgotten. 3 matches. She lit one candle and placed it on the kitchen table. Its tiny flame flickered like hope trying not to die. The temperature inside the house was dropping. She could feel it in her fingers, her toes, the tip of her nose. She wrapped herself in 4 blankets and sat on the couch, shivering. The candle burned low. Outside, the storm raged with a violence that shook the walls. She tried calling Linda's cell phone. It rang and went to voicemail. She tried Robert's. Same thing. Tears burned hot against her cold cheeks. She was so tired of this. Tired of being forgotten. Tired of being the kid no one really wanted. Tired of surviving instead of living. Her mother used to say, "Baby, you're tougher than you know." But sitting alone in a freezing house on Christmas Eve while a blizzard tried to swallow the world, Emma didn't feel tough. She felt small, breakable, afraid. By 8 o'clock, she couldn't feel her fingers. The candle had burned out. The darkness pressed in from all sides. Her breath came in shaky clouds. She knew, with the kind of certainty that settles deep in your bones, that she couldn't stay here. If she stayed, she would freeze. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not in the next few hours. But the Reynolds wouldn't be back until late, if they could even get back through the storm. And by morning, if the power didn't return, if the temperature kept dropping, she'd be in serious danger. Emma stood up, her legs stiff and aching. She pulled on every piece of clothing she owned. 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, a hoodie, a jacket that was too small, a knit hat with a hole in it, gloves that didn't match. She stuffed the blanket into her backpack along with the box of crackers and a bottle of water. She laced up her boots, the only sturdy thing she owned, a donation from the church clothing drive. Her hands shook as she zipped her jacket. This was insane. Going out into a blizzard was the kind of thing people died doing. She knew that, but staying felt like dying slowly. At least out there, she had a chance. There was a neighbor, the Callahan farm, about 2 miles east. If she could make it there, she'd be safe. They had a wood stove, a generator. They were the kind of people who prepared for Montana winters. Emma opened the front door, and the wind nearly ripped it from her hands. Snow blasted into the house like a living thing, stinging her face, stealing her breath. She stepped out onto the porch, and the cold hit her like a fist. It was worse than she'd imagined. So much worse. The world had disappeared. There was no road, no fence, no sky. Just white chaos and wind that screamed. She pulled the door shut behind her and stepped off the porch. The snow was already knee-deep. Each step was a battle. She aimed herself east, toward where she remembered the Callahan farm should be, and started walking. The wind shoved her sideways. The snow filled her eyes, her nose, her mouth. She couldn't see more than 3 feet ahead, but she kept moving because stopping meant freezing, and freezing meant dying, and Emma had survived too much to die alone on Christmas Eve in a field she didn't even belong to. She didn't know how long she walked. Time became meaningless. There was only the next step, and the next, and the next. Her legs burned, her lungs ached. Ice formed on her eyelashes. She stumbled over something buried in the snow and fell hard, her face pressed into the frozen ground. For a moment, she couldn't move. The cold was so complete, so overwhelming, that it felt almost warm. She'd read about that once, how freezing to death felt peaceful at the end, like falling asleep. No. The word came from somewhere deep, somewhere that sounded like her mother's voice. Not like this. Get up. Emma pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet. She blinked away the snow and looked around, desperate for any landmark, any sign. And that's when she saw it. Through the swirling white, a shape, low, rounded, wrong. It didn't look like a barn or a house or anything she recognized. It looked like something out of a storybook. A dome rising from the hillside, covered in snow and earth, with a round door set into the front like the entrance to a fairy tale. Emma stared at it, convinced she was hallucinating. But it didn't disappear. If anything, it became clearer as she stumbled toward it. The structure was built into the side of a hill, half buried, organic. The roof was covered in earth and snow, but she could see timbers beneath, crafted with care. A stone chimney rose from the top, dark against the white sky, and the door was painted deep green, round and wooden, with iron hinges that looked hand-forged. It was the most beautiful, strange thing she'd ever seen. She reached the door and pressed her hand against it. Solid. Real. She tried the handle, expecting it to be locked, expecting to have to break a window or curl up against the wall and hope. But the handle turned. The door swung inward, and warmth, actual warmth, spilled out into the frozen night. Emma didn't hesitate. She stumbled inside and slammed the door shut behind her. The wind's scream was cut off instantly, replaced by silence so thick it felt like a blanket. She stood there, dripping melted snow onto a wooden floor, gasping for breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. Slowly, her eyes adjusted to the dim interior. The cabin was one large room, circular, with a low ceiling supported by curved wooden beams. A fireplace sat against the far wall, and in it, impossibly, coals still glowed faintly red. Emma moved toward it like a moth to flame. Beside the fireplace, a neat stack of firewood sat waiting. She grabbed a log with shaking hands, placed it on the coals, and watched as the wood caught, flames licking upward, light and heat spreading through the space. She collapsed onto the floor in front of the fire, pulling off her wet gloves, holding her frozen hands toward the warmth. Tears streamed down her face, hot and relieved. She was alive. She'd made it. She didn't know where she was or who this place belonged to, but she was alive. As the warmth returned to her body, Emma began to notice details. The cabin wasn't abandoned. At least it didn't feel abandoned. Everything was too clean, too organized. The floor was swept. The furniture, a small bed, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a bookshelf, looked handmade but well-maintained. Quilts were folded neatly on the bed. Dishes sat clean on a shelf. Candles were lined up on the table, matches beside them. It was as if someone had just stepped out and would be back any moment. She lit one of the candles with a stick from the fire and held it up, exploring. The bookshelf was full, leather-bound volumes and paperbacks crammed together. She tilted her head to read the spines. Art history, architecture, memoirs, books about places with names like Florence, Vienna, Prague. On the table, a journal lay open, the pages filled with neat handwriting. She leaned closer, reading the last entry. December 24th, 7 years since I chose this path. 7 years of solitude, but the collection is nearly complete. Perhaps this Christmas will be the last one I spend alone. Emma frowned. 7 years ago. That would be 2017. But the date on the entry was December 24th, 2017. This was 2024 now. Whoever wrote this hadn't been back in 7 years. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold ran down her spine. Where had they gone? What collection? She turned the journal's pages backward, scanning entries. The handwriting mentioned shipments, acquisitions, careful negotiations, names of artists she didn't recognize, dates and places. On the wall above the table, a photograph hung in a simple frame. A man, elderly, maybe 70, with kind eyes and silver hair, stood beside the round door of this very cabin. He wore a thick sweater and held a pipe, smiling gently at the camera. In the bottom corner, written in faded ink, Theodore Blackwell, guardian of lost things. Theodore. Emma whispered the name aloud. It felt important, weighty. She looked around the cabin again, seeing it differently now. This wasn't just shelter. This was someone's home, someone's refuge. And he'd called himself a guardian. Of what? Her stomach growled, loud in the quiet. She realized she hadn't eaten since the crackers at noon. She moved to a small cupboard near the fireplace and opened it. Inside, rows of canned goods sat organized by type. Soup, beans, vegetables, all the labels old but intact. She grabbed a can of soup, found a pot hanging on a hook, and heated it over the fire. The smell of chicken noodle filled the cabin, warm and ordinary and perfect. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, letting the warmth spread through her body. Outside, the storm continued its rage, but inside, she was safe, fed, warm. For the first time in months, maybe years, Emma felt something close to peace. After she finished eating, exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She added another log to the fire, pulled the quilts from the bed, and made a nest on the floor near the hearth. The quilts were heavy, handmade, stitched with care. She wrapped herself in them and lay down, watching the firelight dance across the curved ceiling. Her last thought before sleep took her was a question. Who was Theodore Blackwell, and why did it feel like this cabin had been waiting for her? The snow fell silent and thick through the night, burying the world outside. But inside the strange Hobbit cabin built into the Montana hillside, a lost girl slept deeply, safely, dreaming of warmth and strangers who left doors unlocked for those who needed shelter most. When Emma woke, pale grey light filtered through a small round window near the ceiling. The fire had burned down to coals again, and the cabin had cooled, but not dangerously. She added wood, stirred the embers, and watched flames return to life. Her body ached from the cold and the walking, but she was alive. That counted for something. She stood and moved to the window, standing on the chair to peer outside. The storm hadn't stopped. If anything, it looked worse. Snow piled against the cabin's walls in drifts that reached halfway up the round door. The world beyond was still nothing but white. She wasn't going anywhere. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. The realization should have scared her, but instead, she felt oddly calm. She had food. She had warmth. She had shelter. For now, that was enough. Emma spent the morning exploring more carefully. She examined every book on the shelf, running her fingers along spines, reading titles. The Lost Art of Florence. Stolen Beauty, A History of Art Theft. Guardians and Ghosts, Tales of Recovery. She pulled one book out, a heavy volume with gilded edges, and opened it to a random page. A photograph of a painting filled the spread. A woman in blue, her expression serene and mysterious. The caption read, Vermeer's Woman Reading a Letter, Stolen 1990, Recovered 2003. Recovered. That word appeared again and again as she flipped through the book. Stolen artworks, found and returned. She replaced the book and pulled out another. Same theme. Art theft, recovery, restitution. Why did Theodore have so many books about stolen art? She moved to the desk, opening drawers carefully, feeling like an intruder but unable to stop her curiosity. Inside, she found folders filled with newspaper clippings. Headlines jumped out at her. Priceless Monet vanishes from private collection. Rembrandt stolen in daring museum heist. Lost treasures still missing after 20 years. Each article was marked with notes in the margins, Theodore's handwriting tracking details, dates, last known locations. Emma spread several clippings across the desk, her heart beating faster. This wasn't just interest. This was research. Obsession, maybe. But why? One drawer was locked. She tugged at it, but it wouldn't budge. She searched for a key, checking the obvious places, the top of the doorframe, under the desk, in the pencil holder. Nothing. She sat back, frustrated and fascinated in equal measure. The cabin felt larger now, full of secrets she couldn't quite grasp. Theodore Blackwell wasn't just some hermit who'd built a hobbit house in the Montana wilderness. He'd been searching for something, tracking something. She returned to the journal, reading more carefully this time. The entries went back decades, starting in 1994. Arrived in Montana. The collection must be protected. The world isn't ready. Perhaps it never will be, but I will stand guard. I will wait. What collection? Protected from whom? Emma turned pages, scanning years of entries. Theodore wrote about trips to Europe, to South America, to cities whose names she'd only heard in movies. He wrote about meetings with unnamed contacts, about narrow escapes, about purchases made in secret. And always he returned to Montana, to this cabin, to wait. The entries grew more sparse in recent years. By 2016, Theodore was writing only once a month. His handwriting had grown shakier. I'm 73 now. Time is not my ally. The collection is complete, but my strength fades. I must find a way to ensure it reaches the right hands before I'm gone. The last entry, the one from December 24th, 2017, ended mid-sentence. Tonight, I'll make one final check of the vault below. Everything must be, and nothing more. The pen had stopped. The page was blank after that. Emma stared at the unfinished sentence, a chill running through her. The vault below. Below what? Below the cabin. She stood abruptly, looking at the floor. It was wooden, solid, covered in a woven rug near the bed. She knelt and pulled the rug aside. Nothing unusual, just floorboards. She moved to different sections of the cabin, pressing her weight against the wood, listening for hollow sounds. Near the bookshelf, one board gave slightly under her foot, creaking in a different tone. She knelt, running her fingers along the edges. There, almost invisible, a seam. She pressed harder, and the board shifted. Her pulse quickened. She worked her fingers into the gap and lifted. The board came up, revealing not a crawl space, but darkness. And something else, a faint mechanical hum, like electricity running through hidden wires. Emma grabbed the candle from the table and held it over the opening. Below, she could see stone steps leading down into shadow. Her breath caught. This was it. The vault Theodore had mentioned. The secret buried beneath the strange Hobbit cabin. The collection he'd spent his life protecting. Emma sat back on her heels, staring into the darkness below. Every instinct screamed that she should leave this alone, that some secrets weren't meant for 11-year-old foster kids to uncover. But another part of her, the part that had walked through a blizzard to survive, the part that had learned to be invisible in a world that didn't care, that part whispered something different. Theodore's last entry had been 7 years ago, on Christmas Eve. He'd gone down into that vault and never come back up to finish his sentence. Maybe he'd never come back at all. And if he hadn't, if he was truly gone, then whatever was down there had been waiting in the dark for 7 years. Waiting for someone to find it. Waiting, perhaps, for someone exactly like her. Someone with nothing to lose and everything to discover. Emma made her decision. She added more wood to the fire, making sure it would burn for hours. She found a proper flashlight in a drawer, tested it, strong and bright. She took a deep breath, said a quiet prayer to her mother, to whoever might be listening, and stepped onto the first stone step leading down into Theodore Blackwell's vault. The darkness swallowed her, but she didn't stop. Because Emma had learned something important in her 11 years. Sometimes the only way forward is down. Sometimes shelter isn't just about warmth and walls. Sometimes it's about discovering you're exactly where you're meant to be, even when you didn't know you were looking. And sometimes, on Christmas Eve, desperate girls find more than refuge in mysterious cabins. They find purpose. The stone steps were narrow, worn smooth by years of Theodore's footsteps descending into his secret. Emma counted them as she went down. 7, 12, 15, 20. The air grew colder with each step, but drier somehow, controlled. At the bottom, she found herself in a small antechamber carved from rock. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and directly ahead, set into the stone like something from a bank vault, was a massive steel door. It was industrial, modern, completely at odds with the rustic cabin above. A combination lock sat at its center, the kind with numbers that clicked when you turned them. Emma approached slowly, her flashlight beam reflecting off the brushed metal surface. This door was meant to keep people out, to protect whatever lay beyond. She reached for the handle, expecting it to be locked, expecting her journey to end here. But when she pulled, the door moved. Not much, just an inch. But it moved. Emma's heart hammered. The door was open, or at least not fully locked. She wedged her fingers into the gap and pulled harder. The door swung outward with a heavy groan, ancient hinges protesting, and beyond it, lights flickered on automatically, one by one, illuminating a space that stole the breath from Emma's lungs. The vault was enormous. Easily 50 feet long, 30 feet wide, carved from solid rock but reinforced with steel beams across the ceiling. The walls were lined with climate control units, their displays glowing green. Dehumidifiers hummed quietly in corners, and stretching before her in organized rows, protected behind glass cases, hanging on specially designed walls, resting on custom pedestals, was the most extraordinary collection of art Emma had ever seen. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. The first piece she encountered was a painting in a gilt frame, protected behind museum-quality glass. Even in her limited experience, Emma recognized something special about it. The colors were rich, deep, the brushwork visible and textured. A woman sat at a table, reading a letter by window light. The scene was simple but captivating, pulling Emma in until she felt like she was standing in that room, watching that quiet moment. She leaned closer, looking for a label. There, on a small brass plaque mounted to the frame, Johannes Vermeer, woman reading a letter at an open window, circa 1657. Stolen from Gemäldegalerie Alter Meister, Dresden, 1994. Recovered 2009. Emma's hands trembled. She knew that name, Vermeer. Even she knew Vermeer was important, old master, priceless. And this painting had been stolen. Theodore had recovered it, but instead of returning it, he'd hidden it here. Why? She moved to the next piece. A sculpture this time, bronze. A dancer caught mid-movement, graceful and powerful. The plaque read, Edgar Degas, the little 14-year-old dancer, 1981 cast. Stolen from private collection, Paris, 2001. Recovered 2007. Another theft. Another recovery. Another secret kept. Emma walked deeper into the vault, her flashlight beam dancing across canvas after canvas, sculpture after sculpture. Each one had a story. Each one had been lost and found. A Monet water lily painting, stolen from a museum in Tokyo. A Rembrandt self-portrait, vanished from a private estate in Amsterdam. A Picasso, a Renoir, a Caravaggio. The names meant something even to her. Fragments of art history lessons from schools she'd attended between foster homes. These weren't just expensive paintings. These were cultural treasures, things that belonged in museums, behind velvet ropes, protected by security systems. Things that people traveled across continents to see. And they were here, in a vault beneath a Hobbit cabin in rural Montana, guarded by no one but dust and silence and the ghost of a man named Theodore Blackwell. Emma's mind reeled. She couldn't comprehend the value of what surrounded her. Millions? Tens of millions? More? She moved past a statue, Greek or Roman she couldn't tell, its marble surface glowing in the artificial light, past a collection of smaller pieces, jewelry, artifacts, relics. Everything was meticulously organized. Everything was catalogued. Everything was waiting. What happens next will reveal a truth that will shake Emma to her core, expose a decades-long mission of impossible courage, and prove that sometimes the smallest, most invisible among us are chosen to carry the greatest secrets. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. At the far end of the vault, Emma found Theodore's documentation center. A large desk held 3 computers, all dark now, their screens blank. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled by year. She opened the first one, marked 1994 to 2000. Inside, files were organized alphabetically by artist name. She pulled out one at random, Matisse. The folder contained photographs, purchase receipts, bills of sale, provenance documents, letters from dealers. Everything was in order, professional, legal-looking. But these pieces had been stolen. The plaque said so. How could Theodore have legal purchase receipts for stolen art? She opened another file. Renoir. Same thing. Detailed documentation of purchase, restoration notes, chemical analysis reports proving authenticity. She pulled out folder after folder, each one telling the same story. Theodore hadn't stolen these pieces. He'd bought them. From thieves? From black market dealers? And then instead of reporting them, instead of returning them to their rightful owners, he'd hidden them here. Emma sank into the desk chair, overwhelmed. None of this made sense. Why would someone spend what must have been a fortune buying stolen art only to lock it away? Unless, her eyes drifted back to the journal entry she'd read upstairs, unless he'd been planning to return them all along. "The world isn't ready," he'd written. "I will stand guard. I will wait." Wait for what? For whom? She turned on one of the computers, hoping it might have power. To her surprise, it hummed to life, running on what must be a backup generator system. The screen glowed and a password prompt appeared. She tried the obvious ones. Theodore, Blackwell, Volt. Nothing worked. She sat back, frustrated. Then her eyes landed on a framed photograph beside the monitor. The same picture from upstairs, Theodore standing by the round door. But this print was larger, and she could see details she'd missed before. He wore a watch. She squinted, zooming in with her eyes. The watch face showed a date, 12/24, December 24th, Christmas Eve. Theodore's last entry had been December 24th, 2017. She typed it into the password field, 12/24/17. The screen unlocked. Files and folders appeared, dozens of them, organized by country of origin. Emma clicked on one labeled Master Documentation. Inside was a single file, a video. She double-clicked it. Theodore's face filled the screen, the same kind eyes from the photograph, but older now, tired. He sat in this very chair, in this very vault, speaking directly to the camera. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice gravelly but warm, "then I've either succeeded in my mission or I've failed. Either way, you've found what I've spent my life protecting." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My name is Theodore Blackwell. I was an insurance investigator for 43 years. I specialized in art theft recovery. I saw the worst of humanity in that work. People who would burn a masterpiece rather than see it returned. Collectors who valued possession over preservation. Thieves who treated cultural heritage like casino chips." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "In 1993, I recovered a stolen Van Gogh from a warehouse in Belgium. When I returned it to the museum, I learned that within 6 months, it would be sold to a private collector to fund budget shortfalls. A painting that belonged to the world, locked away again, just legally this time. That's when I understood. The system was broken. Museums were struggling. Private collectors were hoarding. And the art itself, the beauty that should be shared, was becoming currency for the wealthy." Theodore sat back, rubbing his eyes. "So I made a choice. I liquidated my retirement, my savings, everything. And I started buying. Not stealing, buying. From black market dealers, from thieves looking to offload hot merchandise, from corrupt intermediaries. I paid fair market value, sometimes more. And I brought every piece here to this vault I built with my own hands. I documented everything, authenticated everything, preserved everything, not for myself, never for myself, but for the future, for a time when the world might be ready to handle these treasures with the care they deserve." He gestured around the vault. "Everything you see here, every painting, every sculpture, every artifact has been stolen at some point in its history. Some were taken in wars, some in robberies, some were sold under duress or seized illegally. And I've recovered them all, not to keep them, but to protect them until they could be properly returned, to museums that will care for them, to countries they were stolen from, to the world." His eyes glistened. "I'm 73 years old as I record this. I've given my life to this work. I have no family, no heirs. My only hope is that whoever finds this vault will understand what I tried to do and will finish what I couldn't." The video ended. The screen went dark. Emma sat in silence, tears streaming down her face. Theodore hadn't been a thief. He'd been a guardian, a protector, a man who'd sacrificed everything to save beauty from being lost forever. And he'd done it alone, in secret, knowing he might never see these pieces returned, knowing he might die before his work was complete. Her chest ached with the weight of it, the courage it must have taken, the loneliness. She wiped her eyes and opened more folders. Inside one labeled Valuation, she found a spreadsheet. It listed every piece in the vault with current estimated market values. Her eyes scrolled down the list, the numbers growing larger and larger. 10 million, 25 million, 40 million. At the bottom, a total $314,600,000. Emma stopped breathing. 300 million. More money than she could comprehend. More wealth than her entire town had probably seen in a century. And it was sitting here beneath a cabin in the middle of nowhere, guarded by nothing but Theodore's memory and a storm that wouldn't stop. She clicked on another folder. Return Protocol. Inside was a detailed plan. Lists of museums, contact information for directors and curators, legal documentation for transfers of ownership. Theodore had thought of everything. He'd created a roadmap for returning every single piece to its rightful place. All it needed was someone to execute it. Someone brave enough. Someone honest enough. Someone who cared. Emma looked around the vault, at the paintings and sculptures that had survived wars and thieves and time itself. She thought about Theodore, dying alone, his mission unfinished. And she thought about herself, a foster kid nobody wanted, sitting in the middle of the greatest art discovery in modern history. Why her? Why had the storm driven her to this exact cabin? Why had Theodore left the door unlocked? Why had the vault been open? It felt like fate, like providence, like something her mother would have called meant to be. But it also felt terrifying, because Emma knew what this meant. This wasn't just shelter anymore. This was responsibility. This was Theodore's legacy, and somehow, impossibly, it had fallen into her 11-year-old hands. She opened one more folder, this one labeled Warnings. Inside was a document filled with names, photographs, and notes. Dangerous individuals still seeking certain pieces, the header read. Theodore had listed black market dealers, corrupt collectors, even some museum officials who'd tried to interfere with his work over the years. Some of the notes were chilling. Approached me in Prague, 2008. Offered $2 million for the Rembrandt, no questions asked. When I refused, he threatened my life. Watch for this man. Another. She's tracked 3 of my recoveries. Has connections in law enforcement. Do not trust. A third. Suspected of ordering the murder of a dealer who wouldn't sell. Extremely dangerous. Emma's blood ran cold. Theodore hadn't just been protecting art, he'd been hiding from people who would kill to possess it. People who might still be looking. People who might know about this vault. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against concrete. Her hands shook. This was bigger than she'd imagined, more dangerous. She was in over her head, way over. She moved back through the vault, looking at the pieces with new eyes. Each one represented risk. Each one was wanted by someone ruthless enough to steal it in the first place. She reached the steel door and stopped. Should she close it? Lock it somehow? Pretend she'd never seen any of this? Go back upstairs, wait out the storm, and walk away when the snow cleared? That would be the smart thing, the safe thing. Let someone else deal with Theodore's legacy. Let someone else take the risk. But even as the thought formed, she knew she couldn't do it. Because walking away meant these pieces would stay hidden, maybe forever. It meant Theodore's sacrifice would be meaningless. It meant that $300 million worth of cultural heritage would rot in the dark while the world believed it was lost. Emma stepped back into the antechamber and looked up the stone stairs toward the cabin above. The storm was still raging. She could hear the wind howling even down here. She wasn't going anywhere today. Maybe not tomorrow. She had time. Time to think. Time to figure out what to do. Time to decide if an 11-year-old foster kid could possibly finish what a 73-year-old art recovery specialist had started. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavy with thought. At the top, she replaced the floorboard carefully and dragged the rug back over it. The cabin looked exactly as it had before, cozy and simple and completely ordinary. But beneath it, hidden in stone and steel, lay a secret that could change everything. Emma added wood to the fire and sat cross-legged in front of it, staring into the flames. Outside, the storm showed no signs of stopping. The snow piled higher against the windows. The world beyond the cabin might as well not exist. In here, it was just her, Theodore's ghost, and the impossible weight of 300 million reasons to be brave. She pulled out the journal again and read more entries, learning about Theodore's life. He'd been married once, briefly, in his 30s. No children. His wife had left him, unable to handle his obsession with work. He'd had a sister who died young, parents who'd passed before he started his collection. He'd been alone for most of his life, by choice and circumstance. The art had been his family, the vault, his home, the mission, his purpose. In an entry from 2015, he wrote, "I wonder sometimes if anyone will understand what I've done, if they'll see it as noble or insane. I wonder if I've wasted my life on a dream that will die with me. But then I walk down into the vault and stand in front of the Vermeer, and I remember why. Beauty deserves protection. History deserves preservation. And if I don't stand guard, who will?" Emma closed the journal, her throat tight. She understood. Maybe she was the only person in the world who could understand, because she knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be forgotten, to wonder if your life mattered. And she knew what it felt like to find something worth protecting, even when no one else cared. By late afternoon, the storm finally began to ease. The wind died down to a whisper. The snow stopped falling. Emma stood at the window, watching the clouds break apart, revealing patches of pale blue sky. The world outside was transformed, buried under 3 feet of fresh snow, pristine and silent. She could see smoke rising from a distant chimney, the Callahan farm maybe, or another neighbor. People were out there, digging out, recovering. The Reynolds would be looking for her by now. Or would they? Would they even know she'd left the house? Would they care? That's when she heard it, the distant rumble of an engine, a vehicle making its way through the snow. Emma's heart jumped. She pressed her face to the window, watching. A black SUV appeared over the ridge, moving slowly but deliberately along what must have been an old access road. It was heading toward the cabin. Emma stepped back from the window, panic rising. Who would be coming here? How did they know about this place? The SUV stopped about 100 yards from the cabin. The engine cut off. The door opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, maybe 50, wearing an expensive-looking wool coat and leather gloves. He stood for a moment, surveying the cabin, his expression unreadable. Then he started walking toward it. Emma's mind raced. Should she hide? Should she run? She looked around frantically. There was nowhere to go. The storm had buried everything. She'd leave tracks. And besides, running meant leaving the vault unprotected. The man reached the door and knocked. 3 firm raps. Emma froze. He knocked again. "Hello?" His voice was smooth, educated. "I'm looking for Theodore Blackwell. Is anyone home?" Emma's breath came in short gasps. She didn't answer. She didn't move. The man waited, then tried the handle. The door was locked. Emma had locked it when she came back upstairs. The man peered through the window, his face close to the glass. Emma ducked behind the table, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She heard him walk around the cabin, testing windows, looking for another way in. She crawled to the fireplace and grabbed the poker, holding it like a weapon. Her hands shook. After what felt like an eternity, the man's footsteps retreated. She heard him return to the SUV, heard the door slam, heard the engine start. She crawled to the window and peeked over the sill. The SUV was backing up, turning around. But the man wasn't leaving. He was just repositioning, parking where he could watch the cabin from a distance. He pulled out a phone, made a call. Emma couldn't hear what he was saying, but his body language was clear. He was reporting, confirming, waiting for instructions. He knew about this place. He was watching it, and Emma was trapped. She sank to the floor, the poker still clutched in her hands. Theodore's warnings echoed in her mind. Dangerous people. People who would kill. People who were still looking. She'd stumbled into something far beyond her understanding. A secret worth $300 million. A treasure that men would murder to possess. And she was alone, 11 years old, with no way to call for help and no one who would believe her even if she could. The SUV sat motionless in the distance, a dark shape against the white snow, watching, waiting. And Emma realized with crystalline clarity that her life had changed the moment she walked through Theodore's round green door. There was no going back now. No pretending she hadn't seen what she'd seen. No walking away from $300 million worth of stolen beauty waiting in the dark below. She'd found shelter in a storm. But what she'd really found was a choice. Stay silent and safe, or speak truth and risk everything. Remain invisible, or step into the light. Be the foster kid nobody wanted, or be the guardian Theodore had been waiting for. Emma looked down at the floorboards hiding the vault entrance. She thought about the Vermeer, about the woman reading her letter in that quiet room, about beauty worth protecting, about promises worth keeping, about a lonely man who'd spent his life doing what was right even when no one would ever know. And she made her decision. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but somehow, some way, she was going to finish what Theodore Blackwell had started. She was going to return every single piece to where it belonged. And no one, not the man in the SUV, not the dangerous people in Theodore's files, not even the system that had failed her over and over, was going to stop her. Because Emma Chen or Reynolds or Martinez or whatever last name she carried this week had finally found something that mattered more than survival. She'd found purpose, and she would die before she let it go. The black SUV didn't move for 3 hours. Emma watched it from the window as daylight faded, her stomach knotted with fear and something else, something harder, determination. The man inside was patient, occasionally stepping out to smoke a cigarette, always watching the cabin. He knew she was in here. He had to. But he wasn't breaking in, not yet. He was waiting for something, or someone. When darkness finally fell and the temperature plummeted, the SUV's engine started. Headlights cut through the night, and the vehicle turned around, driving slowly back over the ridge. Emma waited, barely breathing, until the red taillights disappeared completely. She waited another hour, then another. The cabin was silent except for the crackling fire and her own heartbeat. Finally, at what must have been close to midnight, she made her move. She couldn't stay here. The man would come back, maybe with others, maybe with force. And she couldn't protect the vault alone. She needed help, real help, adult help. But who? The Reynolds? They'd barely noticed she existed. They probably hadn't even realized she was gone during the storm. The social worker? She'd been through 5 different ones in 3 years. They saw her as a case number, not a person. The police? Would they believe an 11-year-old foster kid who claimed to have found $300 million in stolen art under a Hobbit cabin? Not likely. But staying silent meant the man in the SUV would eventually find a way in. Meant Theodore's life work would be stolen by the very people he'd spent decades hiding it from. Meant Emma would become a loose end, a witness who knew too much. She'd read enough, seen enough in her short life to understand how that ended. No. She had to try, had to get to town, had to find someone, anyone who might listen. She gathered what she could. Theodore's journal, some of his documentation, photographs she took with an old instant camera she'd found in a drawer. She wrapped them in plastic bags and stuffed them deep in her backpack. She layered on every piece of clothing again, stoked the fire one last time, and stepped out into the frozen night. The cold hit her like a slap, but the storm had passed completely. The sky was clear, stars scattered across it like diamonds on black velvet. The moon, nearly full, turned the snow-covered landscape into something from a dream, beautiful and deadly. She could see her breath in silver clouds. Her boots crunched loud in the silence. She oriented herself, looking for lights in the distance. There, maybe 5 or 6 miles away, a faint orange glow. That would be town. Holloway, population 342. She'd seen the sign when the Reynolds first brought her to their farm. Emma started walking, following what she hoped was the road beneath all the snow. Her legs ached within the first mile. The cold gnawed at her fingers and toes despite the layers. But she kept moving, one step after another, because stopping meant freezing and freezing meant failing, and she'd come too far to fail now. The walk took 4 hours, 4 brutal, exhausting hours of trudging through snow that sometimes reached her waist. She fell twice, got up both times. Her lungs burned, her face went numb. But eventually, impossibly, she saw buildings. The edge of town materialized out of the darkness like salvation. Holloway was barely awake at 4:30 in the morning. A single streetlight illuminated the main intersection. A gas station glowed fluorescent and empty. Emma stumbled toward it, her body shaking uncontrollably now. She pushed through the door and warmth enveloped her like a hug. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, looked up from her phone and gasped. "Jesus, honey, are you okay?" Emma couldn't speak. Her jaw was too cold. She just nodded and moved toward the coffee station, holding her hands over the steam. The clerk came around the counter. "Where are your parents? What are you doing out in this cold?" Emma's voice cracked when she finally spoke. "I need help." The clerk, whose name tag read Diane, brought her hot chocolate and a blanket from the back room. She called someone, and within 20 minutes, Sheriff Tom Hadley walked through the door. He was in his late 50s, heavy-set, with a moustache that had gone more grey than brown. He looked at Emma with a mixture of concern and suspicion. "You're one of the Reynolds foster kids," he said. Not a question. "They reported you missing yesterday morning. Been looking all over." Emma wrapped her hands around the hot chocolate cup. "I need to talk to you. About something important." The sheriff sighed, the sound of a man who dealt with too many runaway kids and didn't have patience for another. "Look, sweetheart, I'm sure whatever trouble you're in seems big right now, but the Reynolds are worried sick. Let me give them a call. Get you home safe." "No," Emma said, louder than she meant to. "You don't understand. I found something at Theodore Blackwell's cabin. Something important, something dangerous." At the mention of Theodore's name, the sheriff's expression shifted slightly. "Theodore Blackwell? Old hermit up in the hills? He's been gone for years." 7 years, Emma said. "Since December 24th, 2017. But his cabin is still there, and underneath it there's a vault full of stolen art, worth $300 million. The sheriff stared at her. Diane stared at her. The silence stretched so long Emma could hear the cooler humming. Then Sheriff Hadley laughed, not cruelly, but dismissively. "Honey, I think the cold might have gotten to you. Theodore was an odd duck, sure, but he was just a lonely old man who liked his privacy. There's no vault, no stolen art. You probably just found some old paintings he had hanging up and your imagination ran wild." "I have proof," Emma said desperately. She pulled out her backpack and started removing the plastic-wrapped documents. Theodore's journal, the photographs, the documentation. She spread them across the counter. "Look, please just look." The sheriff picked up the journal, flipped through a few pages, his expression unchanged. He looked at the photographs of the vault, the paintings. Could be anywhere, could be faked. Hell, could be pictures from a museum. "They're not," Emma insisted. "I was there. I saw them. A Vermeer, a Rembrandt, dozens of them. And there's a man watching the cabin. He came yesterday in a black SUV. He knows about it. He's waiting." Sheriff Hadley set the journal down and put a hand on Emma's shoulder. "Listen to me. You've been through a trauma. The storm, being alone, it messes with your head. The Reynolds said you ran away. You probably got disoriented, found Theodore's old place, spent a couple nights there, and your mind filled in the blanks with stories. It happens." Emma felt tears burning hot against her cold cheeks. "I'm not making this up. I'm not confused. It's real. It's all real." "I'm sure it feels real to you," the sheriff said gently. "But what you're describing, it's not possible. I'm going to call the Reynolds now. You need rest and proper care." Emma watched him walk to the back office, phone in hand. She looked down at the documents spread across the counter. Everything she'd risked her life to bring here. Proof that should have mattered. But it didn't. Because she was just a kid. A runaway foster kid with an imagination. No one was going to believe her. She gathered the documents slowly, hands shaking, and stuffed them back into her bag. Diane offered a sad smile. It's okay, honey. Sheriff Hadley is right. You just need some sleep and a warm meal. Emma didn't respond. She walked to the far corner of the gas station and sat on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. She'd failed. Failed Theodore. Failed herself. The truth was screaming inside her, but the world had gone deaf. 30 minutes later, the Reynolds truck pulled up outside. Linda and Robert came in, their faces set in matching expressions of annoyance masking as concern. There you are, Linda said. Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? Sheriff Hadley explained the situation in low tones. Emma heard fragments. Storm. Found shelter. Confused. Needs rest. The Reynolds nodded along like they understood, like they cared. Come on, Robert said to Emma. Let's get you home. Emma stood slowly. She had no choice. Where else could she go? She followed them to the truck, climbed into the back seat, and stared out the window as Holloway disappeared behind them. But as they drove, she made a decision. She wasn't giving up. Not yet. The next morning, Emma woke on the couch where the Reynolds had told her to sleep. The house was empty again. They'd left for work without waking her. She found cereal in the cupboard and ate mechanically, her mind racing. If the sheriff wouldn't listen, who would? She needed someone with authority, someone who understood art, someone who would take her seriously. She grabbed her backpack and walked the 4 miles back into town. Her body protested every step, still exhausted from the previous night's trek, but she pushed through. Holloway had a library, small, underfunded, but functional. Emma had been there once with a school group. She remembered it had computers, internet. She pushed through the doors just as they opened at 9. The librarian, an elderly woman with white hair pulled into a neat bun, looked up from the desk and smiled. Well, good morning. You're here early. Emma nodded, too focused to respond properly. She went straight to the computers and started searching. Art theft, FBI, recovery. She found the FBI Art Crime Team website, read about their work, their mission. This was who she needed. But how did an 11-year-old contact the FBI? She started typing an email, explaining everything, but it sounded insane even as she wrote it. She deleted it and started again, and again. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Researching something for school? Emma turned. The librarian stood there, arms crossed but not unkindly. Her name tag read Margaret Holloway. Up close, she looked to be in her late 70s, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Not exactly, Emma admitted. Margaret's gaze drifted to the computer screen, to the FBI website still open. One eyebrow raised. That's quite advanced research for someone your age. Emma's instinct was to close the browser, to hide what she was doing. But something about Margaret's expression stopped her. The woman wasn't judging. She was curious. Genuinely curious. I'm trying to report something, Emma said carefully. Something important, but no one believes me. Margaret pulled over a chair and sat down. Try me. And so Emma told her. Everything. The storm, the cabin, Theodore, the vault, the art, the man in the SUV, the sheriff's dismissal. She spoke quickly, expecting Margaret to cut her off, to laugh, to call her a liar. But the librarian just listened, her expression growing more serious with each sentence. When Emma finished, Margaret was quiet for a long time. Then she said something Emma never expected. I knew Theodore Blackwell. Emma's heart jumped. You did? For over 30 years, Margaret confirmed. He used to come in here every week, borrowed books about art, history, restoration. He was a kind man, brilliant, but secretive, haunted by something. I always wondered what. She looked at Emma with new intensity. He disappeared 7 years ago, on Christmas Eve. I filed a missing person report, but they never found him. Most people assumed he'd just wandered off into the hills and died. But I never believed that. Theodore was too careful, too deliberate. Emma leaned forward. Did he ever tell you what he was doing? About the vault? Margaret shook her head. He never gave me details, but once, about a year before he disappeared, he said something strange. He said, "Margaret, I'm protecting something that doesn't belong to me but can't belong to anyone else yet. If something happens to me, I hope the right person finds it." I asked him what he meant, but he just smiled and changed the subject. She looked at Emma with something like wonder. "You're the right person, aren't you?" Tears welled in Emma's eyes. Finally someone believed her. Margaret stood decisively. "Show me everything you brought." They spread the documents across a library table. Margaret examined each piece carefully, reading Theodore's handwriting, studying the photographs. Her hands trembled slightly as she held an image of the Vermeer. "My God," she whispered. "He actually did it. All those years, all that secrecy. He was protecting the world's stolen treasures." She looked at Emma. "This is real. This is monumentally real. And you're in danger." "The man in the SUV," Emma said. Margaret nodded. "If Theodore was hiding this collection from dangerous people, and someone knows you found it, you're not safe. We need to contact the authorities. Real authorities. Not Sheriff Hadley, bless his heart, but he's out of his depth. We need the FBI." "I was trying to email them," Emma said. Margaret smiled. "I have a better way. My nephew, James, he works for the Department of Justice in Denver. Not art crime, but he can get us connected to the right people. People who will listen." Margaret made the call from her office, explaining the situation in terms that commanded attention. Emma listened through the door as Margaret's voice went from casual to urgent. When she emerged, her expression was grim but determined. "He's making calls now. He thinks we'll hear back within a few hours. In the meantime, you're staying with me. I'm not letting you go back to the Reynolds." "Can you do that?" Emma asked. "I'm 81 years old, and I've lived in this town since before half these people were born," Margaret said. "I can do whatever I please." They spent the afternoon documenting everything. Margaret photographed every page of Theodore's journal. She made copies of the documents. She helped Emma write a detailed account of what she'd found, when, and how. They organized it all into a presentation that would make sense to federal investigators. And through it all, Margaret asked questions, tested Emma's memory, made sure the story was solid. By 5 in the evening, Margaret's nephew called back. "FBI Art Crime Team is sending someone. She'll be there tomorrow morning. Her name is Agent Riley Foster. She specializes in major recoveries." Margaret smiled at Emma. "We did it. They're listening." That night, Emma slept in Margaret's guest room, a real bed with clean sheets and a quilt that smelled like lavender. Margaret made her soup and grilled cheese, sat with her while she ate, treated her like a person who mattered. For the first time in 3 years since her mother died, Emma felt safe. Not just physically safe, but seen, valued, believed. She fell asleep with tears on her cheeks, but they were good tears. Relief and gratitude and hope all mixed together. Agent Riley Foster arrived at 9 the next morning. She was younger than Emma expected, maybe early 30s, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that assessed everything instantly. She wore a professional pantsuit and carried a leather briefcase. Margaret made introductions in the library's back room. Riley shook Emma's hand like she was an adult, firm and respectful. "Miss Chen, I understand you've made a significant discovery." Emma nodded, suddenly nervous. "I found Theodore Blackwell's vault, under his cabin. There's art inside, stolen art, worth $300 million. Riley's expression didn't change. "Walk me through it. Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." Emma did. She told the story again, every detail, answering Riley's sharp questions. The agent took notes, recorded the conversation, examined the documents. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, Riley sat back. "If what you're telling me is accurate, this is the most significant art recovery discovery in Bureau history. Theodore Blackwell was a legend in our world. He worked privately, outside official channels, but his recoveries were real. We always wondered what happened to the pieces he claimed to have found but never returned. Now we know." "So you believe me?" Emma asked. Riley looked her straight in the eyes. I need to verify. But yes, I believe you're telling the truth, which means we need to move quickly. If there are people watching the cabin, they'll make a move soon. She turned to Margaret. I need to see the vault. Today. Can you show me where it is? Margaret looked at Emma. Emma nodded. I can take you there. Within the hour, they were in Riley's government-issued SUV, driving toward the hills. Emma directed them, recognizing landmarks from her desperate walk. When they crested the ridge, the cabin came into view, small and peaceful beneath its covering of snow. There, Emma said, pointing. Riley parked a distance away and pulled out binoculars, scanning the area. No vehicles, no obvious watchers. But that doesn't mean they're not here. She looked at Emma. Stay close to me. If I tell you to run, you run. Understand? Emma nodded, her mouth dry. They approached the cabin carefully. Riley had her hand on her sidearm, professional and alert. Emma led her to the round door, unlocked it with the key Margaret had retrieved from Emma's backpack. Inside, everything was as she'd left it. The fire had burned out, but the cabin was still warmer than outside. Riley examined the space quickly, then turned to Emma. The vault? Emma moved to the bookshelf and pulled up the hidden floorboard. Riley's eyes widened slightly when she saw the stone steps descending into darkness. Jesus, she muttered. She pulled out her flashlight and started down, Emma following. At the steel door, Riley paused. It's open? Theodore left it open, Emma explained. I think he was down here when he died. He never came back up. Riley pushed the door wide, and the lights flickered on automatically. The vault spread before them, exactly as Emma had described. Riley stopped breathing. Her flashlight dropped to her side. She walked slowly forward, her professional composure cracking for the first time. She approached the Vermeer, stared at it for a full minute, then moved to the Rembrandt. The Picasso, the Degas. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and started taking photographs. My God, she whispered. These are real. These are all real. She turned to Emma, her eyes bright. Do you understand what you found? Some of these pieces have been missing for 50 years. We thought they were destroyed, lost forever. But they're here, preserved, perfect. She grabbed her phone and made a call. This is Foster. I need a full recovery team at my location immediately. Yes, I'm serious. Authorization code 77 Delta 9. I'm looking at the Vermeer from Dresden, the actual Vermeer. A pause. No, I'm not having a stroke. Get the team here, now. She hung up and looked at Emma with something like awe. You just solved dozens of cold cases. You just recovered cultural heritage worth more than some countries' GDP. And you're 11 years old. Emma felt tears coming again. I just wanted to finish what Theodore started. You did more than that, Riley said softly. You honored him. You honored every museum, every country, every person who loves beauty and thought these pieces were gone forever. You're a hero. By evening, the hills around Theodore's cabin were swarming with FBI personnel. Vehicles blocked the access road. Agents in windbreakers photographed everything, catalogued everything, secured everything. Emma watched from inside Riley's SUV, wrapped in a blanket, as the impossible became real. Margaret sat beside her, holding her hand. You did it, the librarian whispered. You actually did it. But then Emma saw them. On the ridge opposite, 2 black SUVs parked side by side. The man from before stepped out, along with 3 others. They were too far away to interfere, but close enough to watch. Close enough to remind Emma that this wasn't over. Riley saw them too. She made a call, and within minutes, additional agents moved toward the ridge. But by the time they got there, the SUVs had vanished. That night, Riley assigned Emma a protection detail. 2 agents would stay with her and Margaret at all times until the threat was assessed. The social worker was called, furious that Emma had run away again, but Riley intervened. Miss Chen is a federal witness in an ongoing investigation. She's under bureau protection. She'll remain with Miss Holloway until further notice. The social worker sputtered but backed down when confronted with federal authority. The Reynolds didn't even call. Later, as Emma lay in Margaret's guest room, she heard voices from the living room, Riley talking to Margaret in low, serious tones. "The word is already leaking. By tomorrow, every news agency in the country will know about this discovery. We're keeping Emma's identity sealed, but people will ask questions. She needs to be prepared for what's coming." Emma stared at the ceiling, listening. For 11 years, she'd been invisible. The foster kid no one saw, no one remembered. But now, because she'd been brave enough to walk through a storm, because she'd believed in beauty worth protecting, because she'd refused to stay silent when adults dismissed her, she was about to become the most important witness in the biggest art recovery case in history. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen, valued, protected. And for the first time in her short, difficult life, Emma Chen understood that sometimes the smallest voices, when they speak truth that no one else dares to say, become the loudest voices of all. Because truth doesn't care about age or status, or whether anyone believes you at first. Truth just waits, patient and persistent, for someone brave enough to carry it into the light. And Emma had carried Theodore's truth out of the darkness. Now the whole world would see. The story broke on every major news network by noon the next day. Margaret had the television on in the library when Emma came downstairs for breakfast. The screen showed aerial footage of Theodore's cabin, FBI vehicles surrounding it like protective sentries. The chyron read, "Breaking, $300 million art discovery in Montana." A reporter stood in the cold, breath visible as she spoke. Federal authorities are remaining tight-lipped about the details, but sources confirm that dozens of artworks long believed lost or destroyed have been recovered from a private vault in rural Montana. The collection includes pieces stolen over the past 50 years from museums and private collections worldwide. The FBI art crime team is calling it the most significant recovery in the agency's history. Emma watched, her cereal going soggy in the bowl. It was surreal, seeing her secret broadcast to millions. Margaret squeezed her shoulder. "You did this. You brought truth into the world." Agent Riley arrived an hour later with a team of specialists. They set up in the library's conference room, transforming the small space into a command center. Riley explained the process to Emma with the same respect she'd shown from the beginning, treating her not as a child to be managed, but as a key witness whose testimony mattered. "Every piece needs to be authenticated," Riley said, spreading photographs across the table. "We've brought in experts from the Smithsonian, the Louvre, the Getty. They're examining the collection now. But we need your account of how you found everything, what you observed, what Theodore's documentation says. Your testimony will be crucial for establishing chain of custody and proving provenance." Emma spent 3 days being interviewed, recorded, photographed with the documents she'd recovered. Art historians asked her detailed questions about what she'd seen in the vault. Forensic specialists wanted to know about Theodore's filing system. Legal experts needed timelines, exact sequences of events. It was exhausting, but Emma never wavered. She told the truth, clearly and consistently, because Theodore's legacy depended on it. On the 4th day, the authentication results started coming back. Riley gathered Emma and Margaret in the conference room, her expression carefully controlled, but her eyes shining. "We've confirmed 19 pieces so far. Every single one is genuine. The Vermeer alone is worth $45 million. It was stolen from Dresden in 1994 during renovations. The museum believed it was destroyed in a warehouse fire 3 years later. But Theodore recovered it somehow and preserved it perfectly." She pulled up more images on her laptop. The Rembrandt self-portrait, stolen from a private collector in Amsterdam in 2002. Value, $38 million. The Degas sculpture, taken from a Paris gallery in 2001. Value, $22 million. And it goes on. Piece after piece, all authenticated, all perfectly preserved. Theodore's climate control system, his documentation, his care, it's museum quality. Better than museum quality in some cases. Emma felt tears building. He really did it. Everything he said in his video, everything he wrote in his journals, it was all true. Riley nodded. Theodore Blackwell spent 43 years as an insurance investigator specializing in art theft. We pulled his employment records, his travel history, everything. Between 1993 and 2017, he made over 200 trips overseas, mostly to Europe, but also South America, Asia, the Middle East. Each trip corresponded with the recovery of one or more pieces in the vault. She opened a file folder. We found his financial records too. He liquidated his retirement account in 1993, $320,000. Over the next 24 years, he spent another $1.8 million of his own money buying these pieces from black market dealers, corrupt intermediaries, thieves looking to offload merchandise. He documented every purchase meticulously. He wasn't stealing, he was buying, paying fair market value, sometimes above market, to recover pieces before they disappeared forever. Margaret leaned forward. Why? Why would he spend everything he had on art he never intended to keep? Riley pulled up Theodore's video testimony on her laptop, the one Emma had found. Let me show you. They watched it together, Theodore's weathered face filling the screen, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. When he described seeing the Van Gogh sold to a private collector despite being recovered for a museum, when he explained his decision to start buying pieces himself, Riley paused the video. This is why, she said. Theodore saw a broken system, museums struggling financially, selling off pieces to survive, private collectors hoarding beauty behind locked doors, thieves and dealers profiting while cultural heritage disappeared. So he made a choice. He would become the guardian. He would buy the pieces, preserve them, and wait. Wait for a time when they could be properly returned, when the world was ready to protect them correctly. Emma's voice was small, but he died before he could finish. Riley's expression softened. We found him, Emma, yesterday. The recovery team discovered remains in the vault, near the desk where you found the computer. The medical examiner confirmed it was Theodore Blackwell. He died of a heart attack, likely 7 years ago, on December 24, 2017. His last journal entry was accurate. He went down to make a final check of the vault, and he never came back up. The room fell silent. Emma pictured Theodore alone on Christmas Eve, descending those stone steps for the last time. Had he known? Had he felt it coming? Or had death simply taken him quickly, mercifully, surrounded by the beauty he'd spent his life protecting? He was 73, Riley continued quietly. No family, no close friends except Margaret. He'd dedicated everything to this mission, and when he died, the secret died with him. Until you. She looked at Emma with an intensity that made the girl sit straighter. You completed his life's work. Without you, these pieces would have stayed hidden, maybe forever. The people watching the cabin, the dangerous individuals Theodore warned about in his files, they would have eventually found a way in. The art would have been scattered to private collections, lost again. But you exposed it. You brought it into the light. You gave Theodore's sacrifice meaning. Over the following weeks, the authentication process continued. Experts confirmed piece after piece. A Monet water lily painting stolen from Tokyo in 1998. A Caravaggio taken during World War II and believed destroyed. A Picasso from his Blue period, missing since 1987. Ancient Greek artifacts, Roman sculptures, Renaissance drawings. The final count was staggering. 314 pieces, spanning 2,000 years of human artistic achievement. Total estimated value, $327 million. The returns began in January. The first piece to go home was the Vermeer. Emma watched on television as it was unveiled at the Gemäldegalerie Alter Meister in Dresden, returned after 30 years. The museum director wept openly as she stood before it. We thought we had lost this forever, she said in accented English. This is not just a painting returning. This is a piece of our soul coming home. More returns followed. The Rembrandt to Amsterdam, the Degas to Paris, a stolen Raphael drawing to the Uffizi in Florence. Each return was news. Each one brought tears, gratitude, disbelief. Museums held ceremonies. Countries issued statements of thanks. The art world, usually cynical and competitive, unified in wonder at what Theodore Blackwell had accomplished and what a young girl had revealed. Through it all, Emma's identity remained sealed. The FBI protected her fiercely. News reports referred to her only as a miner who discovered the collection. But within the art community, among the investigators and curators and historians, her name was known, and she was treated with reverence. In February, Agent Riley called Emma and Margaret to a private meeting. "The Bureau has protocols for situations like this," she explained. "When a civilian aids in the recovery of stolen property, there's often a reward. Usually, it's a percentage of the recovered value, paid out by insurance companies, museums, or governments whose property was returned." She slid a document across the table. "In this case, multiple entities have contributed to a reward fund. The total amount being offered to you, Emma, is $2,700,000. Emma couldn't breathe. Margaret gasped. Riley continued, her voice calm and professional. "The money will be placed in a trust fund, managed by court-appointed trustees until you turn 18. It will cover your education, living expenses, medical care, everything you need, and when you're an adult, the remainder becomes fully yours. $2,700,000. Emma's mind couldn't grasp it. A month ago, she'd been wearing donated clothes and eating crackers for Christmas dinner. Now she had more money than she'd ever imagined existed. "There's more," Riley said. "Margaret Holloway has petitioned to become your legal guardian. Given the circumstances, given her existing relationship with you and her standing in the community, the state is expediting the process. If you agree, Emma, you won't be going back to foster care. You'll be staying with Margaret permanently." Emma turned to the elderly librarian, tears streaming down her face. Margaret's eyes were wet too. "I know I'm old," Margaret said, her voice shaking. "I know I'm not what you might have dreamed of in a family. But I see you, Emma. I believe in you. And if you'll have me, I'd be honored to be your guardian." Emma couldn't speak. She just nodded and threw her arms around Margaret, sobbing into her shoulder. After years of being moved from home to home, of being invisible and unwanted, she'd found something she'd thought was lost forever. She'd found family. The paperwork was finalized in March. Emma officially became Emma Chen Holloway, taking Margaret's name alongside her mother's. She moved her few belongings into Margaret's house permanently, transforming the guest room into her own space. Margaret helped her decorate, treating every decision like it mattered because it did. They painted the walls pale blue. They hung pictures. They built bookshelves for the growing collection of art books Emma was accumulating. School became different too. Emma had always been quiet, invisible by habit and necessity, but word had leaked, despite the FBI's best efforts, that she was the girl who'd found the treasure. Students who'd never noticed her before suddenly wanted to be her friend. Teachers looked at her with new respect. It was uncomfortable at first, overwhelming, but Margaret helped her navigate it, teaching her how to stay grounded, how to distinguish between people who cared about her and people who cared about her story. In April, the FBI and the Montana state government announced plans for the cabin. Theodore's property would be preserved as the Blackwell Heritage Art Education Center. The cabin itself would remain exactly as Theodore had left it, a monument to his dedication. The vault would be converted into a rotating exhibition space, displaying pieces temporarily before they were returned to their rightful homes. And surrounding it, they would build an education center, offering classes in art history, conservation, and ethics. Emma and Margaret were invited to help design the center. Emma poured herself into the project, learning about museum design, educational programming, accessibility. She wanted it to be a place where kids like her, kids from small towns and difficult circumstances, could experience beauty and possibility, where they could learn that one person, no matter how ordinary they seemed, could make an extraordinary difference. The center's mission statement, which Emma helped write, read, "In honor of Theodore Blackwell, guardian of lost beauty, and in recognition that courage and conviction can be found in the most unexpected places, we dedicate this space to the belief that art belongs to all people, that truth deserves protection, and that even the smallest voice, when speaking with integrity, can change the world." Summer brought more returns. A Botticelli drawing to the British Museum, a collection of ancient Egyptian artifacts to Cairo, a Goya painting to Madrid. Each time, Emma watched the ceremonies online, seeing the joy and gratitude, knowing she'd helped make it possible. Letters began arriving at Margaret's house, forwarded by the FBI. Handwritten notes from museum directors, from historians, from ordinary people who'd traveled to see a returned masterpiece and wanted to thank the girl who'd found it. One letter, from an elderly woman in Dresden, read, "My grandmother took me to see the Vermeer when I was a little girl, before it was stolen. She died believing she would never see it again. I went to the museum yesterday, on what would have been her 100th birthday, and stood before that painting. I wept for her, for the beauty she loved that had come home. Thank you for giving me that moment. Thank you for finishing what Mr. Blackwell started." Emma kept every letter in a special box. They reminded her why it had all mattered, why speaking truth, even when no one believed her, had been worth the risk. As Christmas approached again, almost a year after Emma's desperate walk through the blizzard, preparations for a special ceremony began. The Smithsonian Museum of Art in Washington, D.C. would host an event honoring Theodore Blackwell's legacy and recognizing Emma's role in revealing it. Major museums from around the world would attend. Art historians, FBI officials, government representatives. It would be the art world's event of the decade. Emma was terrified. Margaret helped her pick out a dress, something simple and elegant in deep blue. They practiced her speech together, Margaret listening patiently as Emma rehearsed in the living room, stumbling over words, fighting anxiety. "You've faced down thieves and blizzards," Margaret reminded her gently. "You've told truth to power and won. You can speak in front of a crowd." On December 23rd, Emma and Margaret flew to Washington. It was Emma's first time on a plane, first time seeing the nation's capital. Riley met them at the airport, accompanied by an official security detail. "There are still people who'd like to get their hands on information about Theodore's network," she explained. "We're not taking chances with your safety." That evening, Emma stood in her hotel room, looking out over the illuminated monuments. The Washington Monument glowed white against the dark sky. The Capitol dome shone like a beacon. Somewhere in this city of power and politics and history, Theodore Blackwell had walked decades ago, investigating thefts, tracking leads, building the knowledge that would eventually lead him to his cabin in Montana and his vault of secrets. The ceremony was held on Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Emma had stumbled through the storm to Theodore's door. The Smithsonian's main hall was transformed, filled with flowers and lights and people in formal attire. Emma stood backstage with Margaret, her hands shaking, her heart racing. She could hear the crowd gathering, voices echoing off marble floors. "I can't do this," she whispered. Margaret took her hands. "Yes, you can, because you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for Theodore. For every piece of beauty that came home. For every foster kid who thinks they don't matter. You're showing them they're wrong." The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. Riley stepped to the podium, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Good evening. We gather tonight to honor two extraordinary individuals. Theodore Blackwell, who spent his life in service to beauty and truth, protecting what others would have let perish, and Emma Chen Holloway, who at 11 years old showed courage beyond her years to complete his mission." Riley spoke about the discovery, the authentication, the returns. She showed images of the vault, of the pieces, of Theodore in his younger years. The audience sat in rapt attention. Then Riley's tone shifted. "But numbers and artifacts, while important, don't capture the full story. For that, we need to hear from the person who walked through a blizzard on Christmas Eve, who refused to stay silent when adults dismissed her, who risked everything to protect beauty she could have stolen or destroyed. Please welcome Emma Chen Holloway." Emma walked onto the stage, her legs trembling, her throat tight. The audience rose in applause, the sound washing over her like a wave. She reached the podium and looked out at hundreds of faces, all focused on her. Museum directors she'd seen on television, FBI agents she'd worked with, strangers who'd come to witness this moment. And in the front row, Margaret, smiling through tears, nodding encouragement. Emma gripped the podium and began to speak, her voice soft at first but growing stronger. My name is Emma Chen Holloway. A year ago, I was a foster kid that nobody wanted, living in a house where nobody saw me. I was invisible, forgotten. On Christmas Eve, during a blizzard, I ran away because I was cold and scared and alone. I found a cabin that looked like something from a fairy tale. I thought I was just finding shelter, but I found so much more. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I found Theodore Blackwell's life work, 314 pieces of art, each one with a story of being lost and then saved, each one preserved with such care, such love. Theodore spent everything he had, his money, his time, his whole life, protecting beauty for a world he wasn't sure would ever appreciate it. He died alone on Christmas Eve, doing the work he believed in. And for 7 years, his secret stayed buried. Emma's voice cracked slightly. When I found the vault, when I saw what was there, I could have walked away. I was just a kid. No one would have believed me anyway. And they didn't at first. The sheriff thought I was confused. The adults in my life thought I was making it up. But I knew the truth. And I knew that Theodore had trusted someone would find it. Someone would care enough to finish what he started. She looked directly at Margaret. I learned something that year. I learned that being small doesn't mean you don't matter. Being young doesn't mean your voice doesn't count. Being invisible your whole life doesn't mean you can't step into the light when truth demands it. Theodore taught me that, even though I never met him. He showed me that one person, working alone, believing in something bigger than themselves, can change the world. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Emma continued, her confidence building. These past 12 months, I've watched as museums celebrated pieces coming home. I've read letters from people who cried when they saw art they thought was lost forever. I've learned about the countries and cultures these pieces belong to, the heritage they represent. And I've realized that Theodore wasn't just protecting paintings and sculptures. He was protecting human achievement. He was guarding our ability to create beauty, to preserve it, to share it across generations. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Recently, the FBI found something in Theodore's vault we'd missed before, a sealed letter addressed to whoever finds this. I'd like to read part of it now. Emma's hands shook as she unfolded the page. Theodore wrote, If you're reading this, then I've completed my watch. 40 years I've spent recovering what was stolen, protecting what was endangered, waiting for the right moment to return it all. I've lived alone, worked in secret, sacrificed everything a normal life offers. Some might call this obsession, some might call it madness, but I call it love. Her voice grew stronger. Love for the Vermeer's quiet light. Love for the way a Rembrandt captures human dignity. Love for the grace of a Degas dancer, the passion of a Picasso, the serenity of ancient sculpture. This art was created by humans reaching for something transcendent. It belongs to all of us, not to thieves or oligarchs or even museums that might sell it to survive. It belongs to the world, and I've kept it safe until the world was ready to receive it properly. Emma looked up from the letter. Theodore goes on to thank whoever found the collection. He writes, I don't know who you are, but I know you care, because if you didn't, you wouldn't have looked this far. Thank you for seeing what I saw. Thank you for believing beauty matters. Thank you for finishing this work. You've given my life meaning beyond my death. You've proven that guardianship can pass from one person to another, that missions outlive the people who start them, that hope persists even when hope seems foolish. She folded the letter carefully. I'm 12 years old now. I have a home with Margaret, the best guardian anyone could ask for. I have resources I never dreamed of, opportunities I never imagined. But more than that, I have purpose. I know now that my life matters, that the voices of kids like me, kids from foster care, kids who've been overlooked and underestimated, those voices can change the world when they speak truth. Emma's eyes swept across the audience. The Blackwell Heritage Art Education Center will open next summer in Montana. It's being built around Theodore's cabin and vault. It will offer free programs for students from underserved communities, teaching them about art, conservation, and the power of protecting what matters. Because Theodore believed that beauty belongs to everyone, and I believe that everyone deserves the chance to discover they're capable of extraordinary things. She paused, her final words forming. A year ago, I walked through a blizzard thinking I was just trying to survive. But I was walking toward my purpose, toward the realization that sometimes the most desperate moments lead us exactly where we need to be. Theodore Blackwell spent his life being a guardian of lost things. He guarded art. But in doing so, he guarded something bigger, the belief that one person can make a difference. That dedication matters. That beauty is worth protecting even when no one's watching. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper, but the microphone carried it clearly. I'm not special. I'm not exceptional. I'm just a kid who was paying attention when the world gave me a chance to do something that mattered. And I took it. Because Theodore taught me, across the gulf of death, that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Emma stepped back from the podium. Thank you for honoring Theodore Blackwell tonight. Thank you for believing that his life's work mattered. And thank you for teaching me that sometimes the smallest person in the room, when they stand up for truth, becomes the most important voice in the world. The audience erupted. People rose to their feet, applause thundering through the hall. Emma saw tears on faces, saw people embracing, saw the raw emotion her words had unlocked. She stepped off the stage and into Margaret's arms, both of them crying, both of them holding each other like the family they'd become. Riley was there too, her professional demeanor cracked, pride evident in her expression. You did Theodore proud, she said simply. The rest of the evening was a blur. Dignitaries approached Emma, shaking her hand, thanking her. Museum directors invited her to visit their institutions. Educators asked if she'd speak to their students. A film producer wanted to option her story. Through it all, Margaret stayed close, running interference when Emma got overwhelmed, ensuring she had space to breathe. Later, back at the hotel, Emma stood at the window again, looking out at the illuminated city. Margaret came to stand beside her. How do you feel? She asked. Emma thought about it. Different, she finally said. A year ago, I felt invisible, like I was taking up space in a world that didn't want me. But now, she trailed off, searching for words. Now I feel seen. Not just seen, valued. Like my life has a trajectory, a purpose. Like everything that happened, all the bad stuff, the foster homes, losing my mum, the loneliness. It was all leading somewhere. Margaret squeezed her shoulder. You've given so many people hope, Emma. Not just by finding the art, but by showing them what's possible when we refuse to stay silent. When we believe that truth matters more than comfort. They stood in companionable silence for a while. Then Emma asked, Do you think Theodore knew? When he built that cabin, when he left the door unlocked, when he created the vault, do you think he knew somehow that I'd find it? Margaret considered the question. I think Theodore believed in providence, in things happening for reasons we don't always understand in the moment. I think he hoped that the right person would find his life's work. And you were the right person, Emma. Not despite being a foster kid, not despite being 11 years old, but because of those things. Because you understood what it felt like to be invisible, to be underestimated, to have something precious that needed protecting. She turned to face Emma fully. You and Theodore, you're the same in the ways that matter most. You both believed that some things are worth any sacrifice. You both understood that beauty and truth don't belong to the powerful. They belong to anyone brave enough to stand guard over them. Emma felt tears welling again, but they were good tears. Tears of understanding, of acceptance, of peace. The returns continued through the spring and summer. By August, 298 of the 314 pieces had been returned to museums, governments, and institutions worldwide. The remaining 16 were pieces whose rightful ownership was disputed or unclear. They would be held in trust at the Smithsonian until provenance could be definitively established. Emma followed each return, keeping a journal of her own now, documenting where the pieces went, the reactions they received, the impact they had. In September, she started 8th grade at a new school, one where she'd chosen to enroll rather than being assigned. She'd become interested in art history, conservation, museum studies, all the fields that touch Theodore's work. Her teachers, knowing her story, encouraged her, but also pushed her to be more than just the girl who found the treasure. Emma appreciated that. She was building an identity beyond the discovery, becoming a person with her own interests, her own voice, her own future. The Blackwell Heritage Art Education Center opened in June of the following year, 18 months after Emma's discovery. The ceremony was smaller than the Smithsonian event, more intimate. Local families attended, curious about the strange cabin that had become famous. Students from nearby schools came for the educational programs, and Emma, now 13, stood beside the round green door where her journey had started, cutting the ribbon. Inside, the cabin looked exactly as Theodore had left it. His journal sat on the desk under glass. His photographs lined the walls. The fireplace where Emma had warmed herself was preserved, a plaque beside it reading, "Here, on Christmas Eve 2023, Emma Chen Holloway found shelter in a storm and discovered a legacy worth $300 million. In seeking warmth, she found purpose. In finding beauty, she changed the world." The vault below had been transformed. Climate-controlled exhibition spaces now displayed rotating selections from museums worldwide, pieces on loan specifically to honor Theodore's legacy. The first exhibition featured 10 paintings that Theodore had recovered, each returned to its rightful home but temporarily brought back to show visitors what he'd accomplished. Emma walked through the exhibition on opening day, reading the plaques, seeing the beauty Theodore had protected. She stopped in front of the Vermeer, the woman reading her letter, forever captured in that quiet moment. "Thank you," Emma whispered to Theodore's memory. "Thank you for leaving the door unlocked. Thank you for believing someone would care. Thank you for showing me that my life could matter." By her 14th birthday, Emma's trust fund had grown through careful investment to over $3 million. She used some of it to establish scholarships for foster children pursuing education in the arts, museum work, or conservation. She called it the Blackwell Chen Fellowship, honoring both the man who'd started the mission and her mother who'd taught her that toughness could coexist with compassion. Margaret, now 83, remained sharp and engaged, running the library and serving on the board of the Heritage Center. She and Emma had settled into a comfortable rhythm, more like partners than guardian and ward. They cooked together, read together, discussed art and history and life. Margaret introduced Emma to classical music, opera, theater, all the cultural experiences she'd never had access to before. And Emma taught Margaret about social media, modern technology, and the perspectives of her generation. The ripple effects of Emma's discovery continued to spread. Other small museums, inspired by Theodore's dedication, launched programs to document and recover stolen art in their regions. Universities created courses examining the ethics of art recovery, using Theodore's methods as case studies. And most importantly, foster care agencies began emphasizing to children that their voices mattered, that they should speak up when they witnessed something important, that being young didn't mean being powerless. Emma received letters from foster kids around the country, telling her how her story had inspired them. One girl wrote, "I always thought I was invisible too, but you showed me that invisible people can become the most important people in the room if they're brave enough to speak truth. Thank you for being brave first." Emma kept these letters even more carefully than the ones from museum directors, because these were the voices that mattered most. The kids who needed to know they weren't alone, that their lives had value, that they could change the world. On Christmas Eve, 2 years after her discovery, Emma returned to Theodore's cabin alone. Margaret had offered to come, but Emma wanted this moment to herself. She brought flowers, Theodore's favorite according to old photos, white roses. She placed them on the desk where he'd sat, where he'd recorded his final video, where he'd written his journals chronicling 40 years of dedication. She lit a fire in the fireplace, the same way she had that desperate night 2 years ago. The flames caught quickly, warmth spreading through the space. Emma sat cross-legged in front of it, just as she had when she was 11 and terrified and alone. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She'd been transformed by truth, by purpose, by the knowledge that her existence mattered. "I finished it," she said aloud to Theodore's ghost. "Every piece has been returned or is being held in trust until we can figure out where it belongs. Your life's work is complete. The art you saved is protecting humanity's heritage again, sharing beauty with the world. You didn't fail. You succeeded beyond what you probably ever imagined." She pulled out her own journal, the one she'd been keeping since the discovery. "I'm going to keep going," she continued. "I'm going to study art history and museum work. I'm going to spend my life protecting beauty too, just like you did. Not the same way. I'll do it through education, through programs at the center, through teaching kids that art belongs to everyone. But I'll be a guardian, just like you were." Emma opened her journal and wrote, "2 years ago tonight, I walked through a blizzard thinking I was trying to survive. I found a cabin that saved my life. But more than that, I found my purpose. Theodore Blackwell taught me that one person, working alone, believing in something bigger than themselves, can protect what the world needs most. He showed me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway. And he proved that sometimes the greatest legacies aren't left to family or written in wills. Sometimes they're left unlocked in round green doors, waiting for whoever needs them most to step inside." She closed the journal and stared into the flames. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, gentle this time, peaceful. Inside, warmth and light pushed back the darkness. Emma thought about everything that had changed. She had a home now, a family, resources, opportunities. But more than any of that, she had certainty. Certainty that her life mattered, that her voice counted, that the invisible girl from foster care had become someone who changed the world. Anyone can change the course of history if they're brave enough to speak truth when everyone else stays silent, if they're willing to protect what matters even when no one's watching, and if they believe that beauty and justice are worth any sacrifice. As the fire crackled and the snow fell soft outside Theodore Blackwell's cabin, Emma Chen Holloway understood something profound. She hadn't just completed Theodore's mission. She'd started her own. The girl who'd found shelter in a storm had become a guardian of light in a world that desperately needed people willing to stand watch over what was precious, what was true, what was beautiful. And she knew, with the kind of certainty that settles deep in the bones, that this wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. Because for Emma, and for every overlooked, underestimated, invisible person who'd ever wondered if their life had purpose, the answer was blazing clear. You matter, your voice counts. And when you find your mission, when you discover what you're meant to protect, nothing in the world can stop you from becoming exactly who you were always meant to be. Not age, not circumstance, not doubt. Only fear. And Emma had learned how to walk through fear 2 years ago, during a blizzard, toward a round green door that promised warmth but delivered destiny. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that courage can be found in the smallest voices, and that truth, when spoken with integrity, can change the entire world.